So I hop out of the pit, which isn't very deep, and I'm just taking a break, and Dale is still excavating away. Then all of a sudden I feel like something comes into the back of my head and looks through my eyes.
I was coming in our backcountry road, and I could see somebody walking in the distance, and I thought to myself, what is this crazy guy doing out in the middle of the night? And I wasn't frightened, but I kind of knew something wasn't right.
Always had an interest in archaeology when I was a child growing up. I went and did a BA degree at University of Toronto. And it was during that time in the summers I was working at prehistoric sites. And it was in the mid-'80s, maybe 86, 87, around there when I went to work at a protohistoric Huron village site, just outside of Hamilton, Ontario, and near Clapperson's Corners. Protohistoric means it was a purely prehistoric native site, but we found like a bead of copper, but it wasn't native copper. In other words, it had tin in it, so it was European, but it was square. It was the shape of a dice. So obviously Europeans had been there. You know, it would be early on, it would be a trade item that had somehow landed there. So we started the excavation, and we found all these features. And by feature, I mean it's just a discoloration within the clay. So basically we're looking at, I guess you call them shadows.
An ancient Aboriginal structure, a shadow or a ghost of what was once there. But what else does the land hold? Hi, I'm Lawrence Chow. I grew up in Toronto, and it's a city that will always be home to me. But I'm not alone. Most of us are attached to some place or another. Whether it's a town, a house, or a patch of land, we've all got a favorite spot. And sometimes that place is so special, we can't even imagine leaving it after we die. Today, we meet David and Cam. Both men have hair-raising accounts of seeing ghosts, ghosts that had such a bond with the land that they just couldn't leave.
I was working with Dale, who was a tall, skinny guy, and we came across this one feature, and we started to slowly excavate with our trowels. We started to find friable rock. We figured it was a sweat lodge. And a sweat lodge is a covered sort of tent, either out of wood materials or leather. And they would take and they would heat rocks in a fire, then they would put them in a sweat lodge. So it would get really hot, like a sauna. Then the natives would go inside to go on a personal spiritual journey, and like a form of meditation. And they still do it today. So we were excavating, we removed all the friable rock, we get to the bottom of the feature, and there's a smaller feature underneath that. So we excavate that, and we found a black bear skull. Black bears are native to Ontario. So there is a bit of presumption on the side, but native people have different clans that they ally themselves to the turtle or to the bear, eagle, you know, the list goes on. And so, because it was a special area where a lot of sort of a spiritual center in that feature as a sweat lodge, we're figuring that it was the Bear Clan that was put underneath it. All these places are sacred in the sense that any place that you put for either a meeting of live people, just in a spiritual sense, or for peace, people can't desecrate it or disturb it. So we were excavating all these features, and there was a river that runs across the edge of the site, and always in the reeds by the river, I would see a sort of translucent, almost transparent figure of a man, definitely native, and he would be standing there, and he'd be looking at me. I was working with Dale, who's a tall, skinny guy, and we were excavating away, and we found a black bear skull. So we presume it was a Bear Clan sweat lodge. There's a small creek that runs across the edge of the site. I noticed a sort of translucent, almost transparent figure of a man, definitely native, and he would be standing there and he'd be looking at me. He'd always be out of the corner of my eye. And it wasn't just looking at me, it'd just be looking in the direction where we were working. It was a very small crew. It'd just be a flash for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, that would be it. And I would notice, I'd just keep on working. I mean, there's nothing you can do or say one way or the other about it. In fact, I didn't even tell Dale. He was nude up top, and it was like, I couldn't say if they were leather or whatever. I presume they would be if it's that early in time. It was like leggings from about here, from his knees up to about his waist. He's not hiding at all. He's watching. It was kind of passive. It could be just out of curiosity. You know, he's probably very curious, right? I mean, I would be too. I don't know, me personally, if I'd been sitting there for 450 years, I'd be pretty curious at anything that would come along. So anyway, I hop out of the pit, which isn't very deep, and I'm just taking a break, and Dale is still excavating away. Then all of a sudden I feel like something comes into the back of my head and looks through my eyes, which is kind of disconcerting, but you're just sort of, what's that? And I'm looking at Dale, and then all of a sudden this voice, which isn't mine, is like coming from behind me, says, look at his knees. He's gonna have knee problems later in life. It's like literally somebody looking through your eyes. It's the weirdest thing. It's like your brain trips out, and now somebody is cognitive of your eyes and then describing it to you, if that makes sense. Like it's their cognizance that's transferred to your brain and not your own. So I was annoyed, and I shook my head and I turned, and I couldn't see anything. And then it was gone. There wasn't a soul around for acres. So, I mean, you know, it's not like I heard something or misheard somebody say something in the distance. There was nothing there. It was just kind of strange, and you kind of continue on your day. I mean, you know, what do you do? Yeah, when I shook off, I felt angry. I mean, it's an invasion, right? You know, I mean, we all have a personal space. So when you feel something that's, you know, potentially or feels like inside your head, that's a total invasion. I had no doubt, even though I never saw him when I felt this thing go into my head and look through my eyes, I had no doubt whatsoever that was the same as what I had seen. So from there, I assumed that it would be some kind of medicine man or healer, because that was his first interest. It wasn't, you know, I mean, he had choices what he could say if he wanted to say, like, you shouldn't be excavating there, you shouldn't be here. It's never on the defensive, just making a point. And maybe with the two of us standing there at the time, I was fine physically and spiritually, and Dale, I'm sure, was fine spiritually. I mean, you know, from talking with the guy. So maybe that was the only problem that he saw, you know, as part of his feeling as a healer. It would make sense in a sense that we would not be outsiders to a healer. We might be outsiders in the sense that that is not a site, we're not of that culture. But based on modern healers that I have met, it's a universal way of thinking and looking at things. In other words, I'm a human being first, and then it's my culture. The important thing is the spirit, which crosses all boundaries. So if he was that kind of person and he had that kind of ability, maybe it was important to him. You know, maybe he felt I was receptive to it. It was an experience. I mean, I can't take away the experience I had, right? So, you know, and as far as what it was, you know, who knows in the end.
Ghostly possession, or a native spirit trying to see his land through the eyes of the living. David doesn't know for sure what happened to him that day, but he does know he felt violated and angry enough to shake loose whatever was in his head. It was the first time he had that reaction. Up until then, he simply accepted what he was seeing. He didn't even tell his coworker Dale about it. If a ghost wanted to enter his body, this passive nature could have been an invitation. But David's angry reaction would have chased it out for good.
My family had acquired a resort back in the early 1890s. My great-grandfather had come over from England and had gotten some free land grants from the Ontario government, and he had settled on a piece on Lake Abase. And by the time I was approximately 16 years old, my mother had taken over the management roles of Port Cunnington, and I had spent some of my summers working at the lodge, and it was just a great time. And the connection that it was my family's, I think, really pushed me to, well, I can't leave this job because, it would be like disobeying the family law. So I stayed and did it, and it was fun.
Cam Loader knows all about attachment to the land. He grew up at his family's lakeside resort and still lives there today. But Cam thinks he's not alone in his love for the place, because one dark night, he says he ran into someone who's been walking the land for over a century.
At about 12:30, I was on my way home, and I was coming in our backcountry road, and I could see somebody walking in the distance, and I thought to myself, what is this crazy guy doing out in the middle of the night? And I wasn't frightened, but I kind of knew something wasn't right. At about 12:30, I was on my way home, and as I was driving, there was a sugar bush on the left-hand side, and as I was approaching that, I can remember seeing in my car lights a person walking. Then I slowed down, and as I slowed down, I looked, and my first thought was, my God, that looks like my grandfather. It was a little bit of an eerie feeling, especially the fact that he had passed away. And I can remember driving past him and him looking at me and me looking at him. And I thought again, is that my grandfather? So I stopped my car, I put it in reverse, I backed up to get a better look. And I got out of the car, and he was gone. I got out of the car, there was no footprints, nothing to be seen. And I can still remember to this day what he was wearing. It was so prevalent with his green boots and his old style of work jacket on, and his jacket wasn't ripped or torn that I noticed. It was, you could tell it was old, and really I remember that kind of blank look in his eyes looking at me. I remember driving home, getting out of my car and thinking, what the heck did I just see? And I immediately went through the old family photo album, and I could pinpoint who it was, and I knew right away that it was Percy Cunnington. My great-uncle Percy Cunnington was my grandfather's younger brother, who had spent some time of his life working at the lodge, and he had a household that wasn't too far down from the resort. And no, I was not a believer. I never, I wasn't a believer in ghosts or seeing unexplainable things. I mean, to me, he truly resembled a normal person.
The Percy that Cam describes wasn't transparent or shadowy. He looked alive. It was only the lack of footprints that led Cam to believe he was supernatural. But he says he saw Percy again, and this time, Cam had no doubt he was seeing a ghost.
I was at the resort, and it was pretty much in the middle of the day, and I was walking home. We had a house that sat on top of the property, and I had noticed while I was walking that there was somebody on my mailbox, leaning on my mailbox. And I thought to myself, well, that's strange. I wonder who you know, that old guy is on my mailbox. And as I was walking closer, every hair on the back of my head stood up, and without a doubt, in my mind, it was Percy Cunnington. Once again, dressed in the same attire with his boots on, his old-style work jacket, and the blank staring. It was like looking at a normal person. And as I approached him, he just vanished. I had to stop and kind of catch my breath and take a look around, and I think the biggest thing about seeing him for the second time was he didn't scare me. I think if I didn't know who he was, then there probably would have been a little scare in the air. But I definitely know who I saw, and for me, it was a real experience. My sense from Percy was he was a stubborn man. I can remember my mother saying he was a very stubborn, hardworking man, very kind man, and he didn't like to be ever told the answer was no. If that wasn't enough, this was again during the day, and I was on the back of the resort walking over to access our east property. And as I was walking down on the porch door, there was a man with his hand on the door and his foot crossed, staring over in my direction. And it was Percy Cunnington again, dressed in the exact same attire with the boots and the jacket and that blank expression staring at me. And he was standing at his nephew's house, Charlie Cunnington, who had one of the original houses on the Port Cunnington property. I thought, I have to run and get my wife so she can see this. So I remember turning around, going into the resort and grabbing my wife and saying, "Come now." Well, she came out with me and Percy was gone. Now, throughout the years at the lodge, since my wife and I have been there, we've also had some of our guests who have come over to ask us about the man wearing the big boots and the old jacket. You know, when you get those stories, it's seeing them for myself and hearing our guests say, you know, this is what we saw. It made a believer out of me. I've had no sightings of Percy since then. The resort itself has underwent a lot of changes in the last years, a lot of new development, and most of all of the old Cunnington houses have now been torn down with new buildings in their place. And I think maybe there's a connection to that the old is now all gone and it's nothing but new. And maybe it was time for Percy to move on. I think Percy would be, I would hope that Percy would be quite happy with the role that I have played and my wife have played. And I really hope that I've portrayed and have, you know, kind of blessed the property with the younger generation of the Cunnington blood.
Percy was stubborn in life, and if Cam is right, he's stubborn in death too. He doesn't want to leave the sugar bush he built, and he presided over the resort until everything from his era was gone. If David's native man is stuck to the land he lived on, he might also be attached to his position there as a healer and the message he had to deliver. The information about bad knees could have been for anyone. A message like that is an example of Kledonism, a practice from the ancient Greeks who believed the gods would sometimes speak through an uninvolved third party. David can't be sure why that message went into his head, but like Cam, he believes that people can become so attached to the land that they never leave it, not even after they die.
I think Percy is maybe, you know, as much as this may sound crazy, that he is, you know, looking out of the lay of the land, checking things out me, so to speak. I think deep down inside me, I want to truly believe that he's there to say, hey, I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere. And I'm gonna maybe show up on your doorstep once in a while.
I guess maybe it's just respect. I mean, you know, if you see something like that, that spirit has more right to be there in a sense, not just because he's native, but obviously he's closer to that spot than I am. I'm just an outsider coming to tear it all up and then go away again. I'd never get up in the day and go, oh my God, I believe in ghosts, you know? I mean, just sort of, I just knew he was there, I saw him, and that was it.